Thank you to everyone for joining our 2023 Trends in Identity Report webinar to learn more about identity crimes and their impact as reported to the Identity Theft Resource Center by victims. My name is Mona Terry, and I am the Chief Victims Officer at the ITRC. This year, we are publishing our third annual Trends in Identity Report, and a big thank you to the ITRC's Alliance for Identity Resilience Advisory Board for their support of the research and publishing of this report. So we continue to see interesting shifts in the number and types of identity crimes reported to the ITRC and the behaviors of the bad actors who steal and misuse this victim information. We also have some new data this year, which I'm excited to share and we'll definitely share later. So who is the ITRC? We have been serving victims of identity crimes for 25 years. And our mission is to empower and guide consumers, victims, businesses, and the government to minimize risk and mitigate the impact of identity compromise and crime. So how does that mission translate into our daily work? Our primary objective is to provide no-cost information about how to protect one's identity, as well as assistance with the discovery of and recovery from an identity crime. So our identity theft advisors take calls, chats, emails, texts, letters from victims nationwide, and then we walk alongside those victims and potential victims, even if they're not victims yet, to assist them with their identity concerns for as long as is necessary. We also maintain a national database of publicly reported data breaches that includes, but is not limited to, the attack vector and the data that was included in that data breach, if that's been shared. So the other thing we do is we provide ongoing education, much like this, to stakeholders about trends in identity crimes and the emotional and physical impact they have on victims. And we do so through content on our website, our newsletters, podcasts, social media, and in our signature reports. So on to the data. Before we start, I want to explain the three major categories the ITRC uses to categorize the types of identity crimes that we're seeing. So attempted misuse is when a bad actor attempts to use a victim's personal information, attempts being the key phrase there. Victims are typically informed by the account holder, and it's usually a financial institution, that someone attempted to open an account in the victim's name, or someone other than the victim attempted to use an existing account, but it was caught by the account holder and denied. Most victims who reach out about attempted misuse are concerned, and rightfully so, that someone had enough information to create or access an account and want to know what steps to take. Actual misuse is what people think of when they hear the terms identity fraud, identity theft, or identity crime. And this is when a bad actor is successful in their attempt to misuse their victim's personal information. Compromised identities or identity compromise include when an individual's personal information is exposed or it's stolen, and that could be due to a data breach, it could be due to stolen documentation or identification cards, or the information can be coerced out of victims, typically through a scam, but through other means as well. In 2023, the ITRC received 13,197 reports of new instances of an identity crime or potential identity crime. This does not include the number of victims who have reached out to the ITRC prior to 2023 with an identity concern and are receiving ongoing assistance. 53% of reports involved compromised identities. 38% of reports in 2023 involved actual misuse of identities. 7% were victims who were just requesting preventative information because some sort of activity that happened made them concerned about their identities. And then 1% of victims who reached out to us experienced attempted misuse. So following nationwide trends that we've seen reported to other entities, the overall number of reports of identity crimes to ITRC are down compared to 2022. So looking specifically at the number of identity crimes, the reports to the ITRC are down, reports about the number of identity crimes impacting victims are up. So a majority of victims only reported experiencing one form of an identity crime. But in 2023, more victims reported being the victim of two or more instances of an identity crime compared to 2022. In some instances, those victims identified that they were a victim of an identity compromise, something like a scam, and then subsequently believed that that's what led to the misuse of their information. but more often than not, victims are calling because they're the victims of misuse that involve multiple types of accounts. Looking at attempted misuse specifically, though attempted misuse only accounted for 1% of total reports of an identity crime, we saw an increase in the types of accounts that victims were reporting. So more victims reported attempted misuse with the creation of new accounts in their name versus someone trying to take over an account that they already have. Attempted misuse of credit card accounts and checking accounts is something that has been reported regularly by victims year after year. But the increase in reports of attempted misuse with mortgage loans, which saw the largest jump in 2023, and personal loans was particularly noteworthy, and it's something that we're continuing to watch in 2024. When we look at actual misuse in 2023, existing account takeover and new account creation have been the top types of reported identity crimes year over year. As you can see here, existing account takeover accounted for 52% of reports of misuse, and new account creation accounted for a little over a third of reports of misuse. A concerning trend that we noted in 2023 was there was a 117% increase in reports of employment-related identity theft, which is labeled false employment on this graph. And this is when a victim's social security number is used to obtain employment. Another concerning trend we saw was there was a 23% increase in reports of criminal misuse of personal information compared to the 2022 Trends in Identity report. And this is where identity thieves are presenting law enforcement with another person's sensitive information. Drilling down even further, misuse and looking at by account, the types of accounts most often reported fell into 4 categories. Financial accounts, 53% of reported victims, followed by non-financial, non-government accounts, which was 35% of reports, federal government accounts, which was 6%, and state government accounts, which was also 6%. Non-financial, non-government accounts include accounts like social media, email, and utility accounts. Just to name a few, those are the 3 most often reported non-financial, non-government accounts. Overall, 24% of victims reported misuse of their credit cards, 17% of victims reported misuse of their checking accounts, the same percentage reported misuse of their social media accounts, and the 4th highest reported account reported as misused were victims who were finding out about misuse when they went to file their taxes. Looking at account takeover versus new account creation, you can see that checking accounts and credit card accounts are impacted by both account takeover and new account creation, with more victims reporting the creation of new credit card accounts in their name than experiencing their credit card accounts being taken over. Account takeover with financial accounts typically involves a thief making unauthorized charges to the account or someone accessing the account to make changes to contact information or login information. Usually they're changing contact information so that any cards or anything like that have access to the account are then sent to the thief. Social media accounts are most often reported as taken over, with victims being locked out of their accounts and unable to get back in, which was particularly concerning to the victims who contacted us who use their social media accounts as a revenue generator because they now no longer have access to that revenue stream. Personal and mortgage loans made the list of top 5 reported accounts reported as opened by a third party in a victim's name. So similar to misuse, we saw actual misuse with both personal and mortgage loans in 2023. And as we saw earlier, identity compromise was the highest reported type of identity crime in 2023. Following trends from prior years, that typically tends to be our highest reported form of an identity crime. But by far the largest method of identity compromise is through scams at 78% of all reports, even though overall reports of scams decreased 18% from 2022. 8% of victims reported their personal information was lost or stolen, with more victims reporting stolen identity cards or documents containing personal information than reporting lost items. And 6% of victims reported compromise of their personal information through a hacked device, typically a cell phone. And we're continuing to get more reports of compromised or unauthorized access to cell phones in 2024. definitely a trend we're continuing to watch. Drilling down a little further into scams, the most common non-sensitive personally identifiable information shared with scammers was a phone number, name, and address. In many instances, scammers already have this information prior to contacting victims, but that's something that victims are also very willing to share. The most common sensitive personal information shared with scammers were full or partial social security numbers, dates of birth, and driver's license numbers. So when we look at the types of scams reported in 2023, Google Voice was the highest reported scam. And that's where a scammer pretends to be a buyer who's interested in purchasing an item, typically on Facebook Marketplace. We've heard about this happening on other platforms too, including dating apps. And the scammer asks the seller or the romantic interest, depending on the platform they're using, to prove that they are legitimate by sharing a code the scammer provides to the victim. So they kind of flip the script a little bit and ask the victim to prove that they're actually legitimate. The code is actually a one-time passcode that allows the thief to link their victim's phone number to a Google Voice account. And Google Voice accounts can only be linked with verified US-based phone numbers. That's why the scam continues to be carried out. Job and employment scams were the second most reported type of scam, and we saw a 118% increase in this type of scam from 2022. I also think that's what led to the most common sensitive PII being social security numbers, date of birth, and driver's license numbers, because that's what they're asking as part of the job and employment scam. And most victims believe this information is necessary to obtain the legitimate job they thought they were applying for, only to call us later to say, I just realized I've been a victim of a scam. Business impersonation was the third highest reported scam. And this is when scammers pretend to be from a legitimate business, oftentimes a financial institution, and just let the victim know there's something wrong with their account, and ask for account information. We did see a decrease in reports of business impersonation scams, though, from 2022. New this year to the Trends in Identity Report is a look at the victims who the victims are, and who the thieves are, as reported by the victims themselves. So a majority of victims self-report their identity crime, but a small number report on behalf of a spouse or partner, or report an identity crime involving their child. So we mentioned earlier that reports of false employment grew 117%. Unfortunately, for an identity crime that involved a child, 48% of the time that identity crime involved false employment. So parents and guardians are typically finding out that their child is a victim of this identity crime either when they're filing their taxes and there's income there that's being claimed under the child's name, or we have parents and guardians that were going to apply for government benefits and are denied their benefits because they find that the child has income reported in their name. Spouses typically reported new account creation or existing account takeover in their spouse's name, and involved various accounts, including credit card accounts, unemployment accounts, checking accounts, and social media accounts. And sadly, victims also report to the ITRC misuse of a deceased individual's accounts, primarily a deceased parent or a deceased spouse or partner. And it's really, really hard to walk through those with victims, because typically they're contacting us because the parent or the spouse or partner is recently deceased, and in trying to close matters of the estate, they're finding out that there's identity theft issues as well. When looking at the identity criminal profile and who the thieves are, majority of victims have no idea who's misusing their information. More often than not, they're reporting it. They have no idea what happened. They're really just looking to recover. When we're looking at criminal misuse of information, 9% of victims knew that it was a family member. And when the identity crime involved new account creation, 6% of victims knew that the thief was either an ex-spouse or a partner, and 6% of victims knew that the thief was a family member. Those are also hard to help victims recover from. A lot of times, victims who know their identity thief don't want to report the identity thief because it's someone they knew so well or know so well. So those can be particularly tricky to recover from. So what do all these statistics tell us overall for 2023? We know that identity thieves are getting better and better at impersonating legitimate sources, such as a victim's bank, a government agency, or someone the victim does business with. AI has assisted identity thieves with creating legitimate sounding emails, texts, websites, kind of any number of written information that makes it really, really hard for victims to know what's real and what's not. Victims are also facing more severe forms of identity misuse, as we saw earlier with criminal identity theft and employment-related identity misuse. These forms of identity crimes are very complex, and they take a really long time to unravel and recover from. The time and effort it takes to really try for these victims to prove that they are a victim in this matter, and then to untangle themselves from all the things they need to untangle from can take a long time. And then, as we've seen with the increase in new account creation, where victims don't know the bad actor, we know that identity thieves often already have enough information to open new lines of credit and other types of accounts. That happens in multiple ways. We know data breaches is one of those ways. And so victims have no idea. They think they're doing all they can to protect themselves. And we know that prevention and protection can go a long way in helping potential victims, but they can't stop thieves who are determined to misuse someone else's information for their own personal gain. That's why the ITRC is here. It's why we continue to exist. We really want to continue to guide victims, whether it's for prevention and protection purposes, or they've discovered they already are a victim. We're here. We're happy to help. So thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about trends in identity crimes as reported to the ITRC. We hope our report is as insightful to you as it is to us. Thank you again to the ITRC's Alliance for Identity Resilience Advisory Board for the support of this report. And please, please feel free to reach out if you or anyone you know may need our help.